from throughout, I thank our District 5 and Miami-Dade for joining us in this conversation. We are on Facebook Live as well, so this will carry us forward even further. All of us in the Ruthless Sisterhood are obviously watching with bated breath, and we stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the movement to dismantle the racism that unfortunately has been undermining justice and accountability for far too long in our communities and throughout Florida. We at Ruthless also stand for equity in healthcare and education and economic opportunity. You know, as I personally watched the anguish and despair that erupted over the last 10 days, it reminded me of a period 20 years ago. My daughter was just 2, and I remember thinking, you know, would Florida be a place that she would be proud to call home? And I envisioned a really more progressive place in order to achieve that. And for 10 years, I personally channeled my time and talent to nonprofits and advisory boards. And then 10 years ago, I focused with a pretty singular focus on helping elect leaders that would actually formulate the policies and allocate resources to implementing those progressive policies, because that's the power of our democracy. And that's the mission of Ruthless Florida. We help women run focused, inspired, and well-resourced campaigns. The Ruthless winning formula means that every woman, number one, learns to tell her story and why she's inspired to run for office and pivot to public service. Number 2, receives the technical support to make an effective campaign a winning campaign. Number 3, she develops fundraising expertise so that her campaign is well resourced to communicate with voters with her vision. And number 4, she's connected to a statewide network of women who are also inspired to improve our communities and our state. I'm proud to say that already in this 2019-2020 cycle, we've endorsed 29 women of color across the state in a field of over 68 endorsements. And this is all levels of office: city council, county commissions, school board, state house, state senate. We will continue to build relationships and support women of color as they discern now if a pivot to public service is in their leadership journey in 2021 and beyond, because our work is not done with the election that women are running now in August of 2020, or even in November. Our work continues on August 19th and on November 4th. And we at Ruthless believe that she is the change. So I am proud to welcome one of those bold women that came to office in 2018. She ran a solid grassroots campaign that honestly stunned the political observers and all those political operatives that like to think that they control Miami-Dade politics. And she did it by being true, by being honest, and by working hard on the ground, talking to voters about the things that matter most in their community. So, Commissioner Eileen Higgins, running for re-election to represent District 5 that makes up downtown, parts of Brickell, Brickell Key, the roads, Shenandoah, Little Havana, Grapeland, all of South Beach, parts of Mid and North Miami Beach, Hibiscus Palm, and Star Islands. And of course, we thank our bold Congresswoman Donna Shalala for joining this conversation. I'll actually refrain from summarizing her long list of accomplishments and only emphasize my favorite one, which was serving as president of my alma mater, the University of Miami. So with no further ado, I would love to ask Commissioner Higgins to please introduce yourself, why you're running, and then we'll hand the baton to Congresswoman Shalala to lead us in this conversation on the many topics that are near and dear to both of your hearts.
Great. Well, Gloria and everybody from Ruthless and everybody from the neighborhood and communities, it is a pleasure to be with you here in our new virtual normal. I am beyond honored to serve as the District 5 Commissioner. It has been an amazing experience to work on behalf of the residents of this very, very diverse district, particularly economically diverse, right? I have the district that has some of the wealthiest people in America, and then I also have working class neighborhoods where more than half of the people who live in them are not yet US citizens and really struggle to make ends meet. So serving that community has been extremely meaningful. When people ask me what it's like to be a locally elected official, I tell them it's the most meaningful work I've ever done. And sometimes you get meaning out of the simple things of running a team, for example, in these terrible COVID days, that literally just deals with my landlord is trying to evict me and making sure that person feels protected, that nothing will happen to them and they will not lose their apartment during this crisis. And then other times you help in a really big way, not just in those small one-on-one personal ways. When you break ground on a new affordable housing complex that you know is, in my opinion, one of the most complicated and biggest needs in our community, to this past week launching the largest revolving loan fund in the history of the county to help our small businesses survive the COVID pandemic, but also so that they can have access to those resources in the future. For those of you that live in District 5, you also know one of my favorite things is to walk our streets. I am a public transit rider. I love being in my sneakers a lot more than I love being in a car. And so one of my other priorities is just making sure that our neighborhoods are as walkable and livable as possible from a pedestrian perspective and a transit perspective. So it's an honor to be with all of you in Ruth's List, and I thank you so much for your endorsement. It means a lot to me, and looking forward to a very exciting summer where we talk about the issues that affect Miami-Dade County and trying to make a difference and asking the voters of District 5 if they would please select me a second time.
Wonderful. Congresswoman?
Well, let me see if I can get Eileen to talk a little about her own background, because she's been a small businesswoman. And I think that's important to our district, in which small businesses are really drive much of our economy, and they're the ones that are most at risk. So Eileen, talk a little about your own experience and how you've been able to really empathize with the struggles of our small businesses.
Yeah, it's been, Congresswoman, it's been really interesting to not just be an elected official, but my sister and I are in business together. She does all the hard work in running the businesses out in New Mexico, but I helped her get started with that. And having our businesses necessarily closed down during the pandemic, I've had to see firsthand what it's been like for small business owners to apply for PPP loans, to apply for the SBA loans, and then for employees to also apply for unemployment while waiting for PPP loans. So it actually it's a horrible experience to kind of go through the fact that your business, which in this case is how my sister makes a living, could shut down. But it also meant that because I had helped and gone through with her the PPP loan process and the SBA loan process, it made our office experts in that process, and the ability to coach the small business owners in District 5 through those application processes. I'm glad that I had the personal firsthand experience so that it could be beneficial to our district as well.
One of the things that we need to do in our community is really to bridge the gap between the Black and the brown communities. Tell me a little about how you think about that and what you've been able to do. So
one of the first things when I was elected and we had a new chairwoman Edmondson, the chairwoman asked me the things that I valued and what were important to me, because she was trying to decide which committees to put me on. And I talked a lot about disparities that hold people back. And so I got one of my very first choices was to make sure that I was on the housing committee, because I really want to be part of solving the affordable housing problem. But the other thing she did was she created something that had never existed before so that I could share it which is the Community Disparity Subcommittee. And we have used those subcommittee meetings as a think tank to examine deeply issues that hold certain pockets of our community back. Often Black residents and sometimes Hispanic residents. And so we have already dug deep and passed legislation on things. Today we just did children's savings accounts, right? So that every child in Miami-Dade County will be able to open, every kindergartner will be able to have their own little savings account, which has been proven nationwide to help bridge that racial gap when mom and dad maybe are barely making ends meet and that child doesn't have that little kid experience of having a bank account. We also are talking about things like cashless bail. Many people are spending the night, sometimes a week in jail. They're spending that time in jail because they're poor, they can't make bail, not because they're a real menace to society. And guess what? Many times those folks are Black. And then we also are working with the clerk's office, and we have a meeting coming up. I've done a 3-month research project on suspended driver's licenses. We have over 300,000 people in our county driving without a license. It's in suspended, not because they're a bad driver. We have some of those, you guys know. But they have had their licenses suspended because they haven't been able to pay fines and fees. And often those folks are members of the Black community. And we're talking parking fees. And so what ends up happening is when you lose your driver's license, you actually lose your livelihood because you can't get to work legally. And we also know that almost 60% of the people that are stopped for driving without a license are Black. So there are a lot of things, even though sometimes things are in the control of other jurisdictions, whether it's the state or the federal government, there are things we can do locally. And so my team has already proposed legislation and has new things in the works, including, I'm sure, as everyone knows, on Tuesday, we'll be taking up finally having a panel to help provide some oversight to the police. As everyone knows, in general, our police do a wonderful job, but every now and then we do need to review an incident, and in our county, we don't have the ability to do that in an independent way.
I think one of the points that you're making is that if we're going to deal with racism in our society, it's more than just the police. It's whether our policies like parking tickets disproportionately discriminate against African Americans in our community. So it's a whole range of issues. I wanted to ask you about the stay-at-home orders and domestic violence and what you're seeing there.
So very interestingly, we have a daily county emergency operations call, although now we only do it about every other day, but in the beginning. And during the pandemic, when we were March and April, when we were really, really very much staying at home, the police actually saw crime go down quite a bit, with the exception of domestic violence, where those calls were skyrocketing and going through the roof. And our commission, as you know, is bipartisan. Commissioner Sosa actually often is in the lead for us on domestic violence issues and has been monitoring this, and so has stood up some resources to take care of that. But you see, I've got my orange shirt on for the Moms Demand Action folks. But the one thing that we do know about domestic violence is if someone who has a history of domestic violence also has a gun in the house, that woman or man, whichever partner, is almost twice as likely to be murdered. And so we still need to work on some of the loopholes that let people with a history of domestic violence continue to keep firearms in the house. And by the way, most police officers you talk to will say one of the calls they're most afraid of is going to a domestic violence call, because someone is enraged. And the chance of them having a firearm is very high. So domestic violence is definitely something that we've been monitoring extremely closely during the pandemic.
And finally, before we go to the chat room, let me ask you about public transit. One of your strengths is you ride public transit, but you understand that not everybody in Miami has a car. So recently you opened up a food bank for people that to walk in. Why don't you talk a little about that? I want you to talk about public transit too, but
well, okay, you would have thought I was trying to land a man on the moon to get people to get food who didn't have cars. And in some ways, it's very understandable. At the height of the pandemic, we were really afraid. I was really afraid. We didn't know if social distancing worked. We didn't know if wearing a mask and washing our hands and wearing gloves work. And I think we now know. We've been staying home. We've been as careful as we can be. And so the original food distributions were only for people who have cars. And I felt as if that was extremely inequitable, particularly in my district. My district has a very high percentage of people, almost 20% of the people in District 5 do not have a car. Now, some of them don't have a car by choice, right? They live and work and they can walk. But I can tell you in Little Havana, they don't have a car, many of them, because they can't afford a car. And so I passed legislation requiring that the county find a solution to in-person food distributions. And I'm proud to say that in District 5, we're leading the way. In some cases, we're actually having walk-up distributions. In other cases, what we've done is we've partnered with community partners who know families that could never get to a food distribution because they don't have a car, because they have a disabled person living with them at home, because they're blind. Miami Lighthouse for the Blind has been one of the partners we've delivered to. Or if they're living with a child who is developmentally disabled, it's hard to kind of sit in a car for a couple of hours. So we have actually been also working through them to deliver door to door, because food insecurity right now in this pandemic, it's everybody has it. We've had very, middle-class people laid off who still haven't gotten their unemployment check. Thank you, state of Florida, for being so bad. And then we have the very poor who have been food insecure. So we just have, who've been laid off. So we have to find a way to do that equitably. And we have, and that's been very meaningful to put fresh produce into the hands of a family that would never have had it if a car was required.
Thank you. Gloria, do you want to go to some of the questions in the chat room?
Thank you so much. So one of the questions, actually, I want to give credit and acknowledgement to Moms Demand Action for being one of our co-hosts for this event. They actually wanted the commissioner to touch base on how you see the barriers to that investigative panel being implemented at the county level. We are somewhat familiar with the issue in terms of the past history, but how do you see it going forward? What's the sweet spot for advocates like Moms Demand Action and others that are moved by the sense of urgency to have this as a tool in the toolbox? What is it going to take to converge the forces for change?
So as you know, Commissioner Jordan introduced the panel probably just a little over 2 years ago. It did pass the commission and Mayor Jimenez vetoed that. Commissioner Jordan then went back to the mayor to work on a new revised version, which is a much watered down version of what she'd originally proposed, but she got consensus from the mayor that he would not veto that if it passed. It died in committee. So we still have a commission that sometimes is distrustful, that's the word, of looking deeply at things in a different manner and in a different way of investigating. So what I'm really proud of our commission and of our chairwoman and of Commissioner Jordan is the chairwoman is going to skip committee on this process and allow the panel to be discussed by the full board. As you know, a one-sided investigation panel is not fair, and so we have to set up a structure that feels fair, right? When you go into a court of law, it feels fair. Like you both sides get to be heard and get to be thought about, and so I think we have to make sure that the residents, because right now the residents don't feel like they have a way of really being heard out, through a panel, because we don't have one that's funded. But at the same time, we have to make sure that our law enforcement officers also feel as if they get listened to in that. So I do think it will be a give and take. I'm pretty sure, like to the 90% level, that we will pass something at the commission meeting on the 16th, that's next Tuesday, to stand something like that up. And my understanding is there are some other organizations possibly that will look to a charter amendment, which would enshrine that in our county charter, which is our constitution, really our local constitution. And what that would mean, should the voters select that we have a panel as a permanent part of our county government, then no future commission could override or change that. The only way that could be changed is if we go back to the voters. And there is still time to get such a thing onto the November ballot.
Interesting. Keep going, Gloria.
Thank you. This question is for you, Congresswoman Shalala. Can you please share your thoughts on the path to passage of the Justice and Policing Act?
The Justice and Policing Act, which all of you know, is being proposed by the Black Caucus in Congress with participation by the Judiciary Committee. It's a series of bills that include banning chokeholds, encouraging local governments to have these civilian review boards. I mean, it has a series of changes in existing law. It's probably the most far-reaching piece of legislation that we've had in decades. It's almost a Civil Rights Act of 2020. It has already 180 sponsors. I don't know whether it's bipartisan yet, but I do know that the White House is reviewing the elements to see whether they're going to support it. They may support parts of it, but not other parts. But it will have, I believe, every Democratic vote. And I think that many of our Republican colleagues are going to vote for it as well. Other questions? We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Commissioner Higgins, how do you see some of the ideas in the Justice and Policing Act potentially filtering down to a county commission level, since obviously they are very much hands-on in some of these tactics?
Well, I think a lot of the things, for example, chokeholds, we need to make sure that the language around that absolutely is clear. And quite frankly, we don't have to wait for Congress to do that, right? We can do that ourselves, because local, we can say we don't want that. And it's a little unclear. Certainly the Miami-Dade police director was very clear that chokeholds are not permitted nor taught by our police force, but we can provide more clarity around that. So we can work in tandem with them. And obviously if Congress does pass something, we will, our police force will follow that. But in the meantime, we don't necessarily have to wait for that. We can start our own panel up. We can ask our chief to make the changes that we believe are important. Right now, just so everybody knows, our police chief works for county government, right? So our police director is part of county government. He reports to the mayor. Therefore, the Board of County Commissioners can make policy that affects the police department. 2 years ago, the state of Florida, the voters of the state of Florida voted statewide to eliminate a professional police chief and to make an elected sheriff. So in 2024, we will move to an elected sheriff. And the Board of County Commission may have less ability to influence how the police department would be run, because it would be a separate organization that would be separate and apart from the county government. So, but for the next 4 years, should we think some of these changes matter, we can ask the police department to make those changes.
Now, my understanding, the state legislature did that without consulting with Miami-Dade.
Correct.
Miami-Dade is the only county that doesn't have a sheriff.
So we don't have an elected sheriff. We have a professional, right, who can be hired and fired very quickly versus an elected sheriff, which politicizes that job. And also, if we decide we don't like the sheriff very much, you have to go through a long drawn out process of recall. I voted against that amendment. I like having a professional sheriff that's accountable to the county government and the county residents, meaning through the government. But the voters of Florida decided otherwise. And it's not just the chief of police, they also decided we had to elect a supervisor of elections. And in the meantime, as you all know, during all the recounts and everything last year, Miami-Dade County was great. You know, we finished everything on time. We were never on the news. And part of the reason for that is we have a professional supervisor of elections in Christina White, for those of you that know her, who works day and night a lot of times to make sure that our election process is completely professional. But in 2024, both of those positions will no longer be professional positions. They will become elected positions. And that there's good things about that and there's bad things about it. So, but the voters chose that.
And it will be incumbent upon us, the voters, to make sure we're holding everybody accountable for what happens.
But one of the things, Eileen, you've been able, Commissioner, you've been able to do is to send out ballots so that people could vote from home, or applications for ballots. Yes. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so as most of you know, here in Miami-Dade County, we have, and in Florida, voting by mail is very common. A lot of people do it. They find it more convenient, and early voting. But because of the pandemic, we'd really like to minimize the number of people that vote in person. And since Florida does allow every one of us to vote by mail, what our supervisor of elections will be doing is mailing to every household that has a voter, registered voter, but they haven't registered to receive their vote by mail ballot. We're going to be sending a postcard out to them. We're going to be asking, please go on the website and do it for us, because it's faster and less error prone if you type your own information in. But for people that don't have access to computers, there'll be a tear off postcard and they can just fill that out, mail that back, and the supervisor of elections will make sure that they get a ballot for the upcoming elections and they can vote safely at home, rather than, particularly for folks that are older or feel as if they have an underlying condition, that they can vote safely from home by mailing in their ballot.
Let me ask you a final question. Do you think it makes a difference that we elect women?
I do. I can think of at least one municipality that has none on their commission, and things are very contentious, and issues about domestic violence are not brought up like we bring them up here. The Commission for Women that we have that is so strong in looking at women's disparities issues, they disbanded theirs. I think it makes a very big difference. Childcare, we're talking about childcare in a whole different way than would happen if we only had an all-male commission. We need everybody, right? We can't have all women, right? I mean, you know, well, maybe we would think it's perfect, but we need a balance of points of view and a balance of gender. But historically, as you know, men are typically elected, but they don't think about the things that we think about. And they are less comfortable expressing some of these family concerns that women might be more likely to take action on. But I can tell you, we would not have talked about domestic violence today in our Public Safety Committee if Commissioner Sosa wasn't on there. That is an issue driven by a strong woman, and so those are the kinds of things that get talked about as you begin to think about why women serve. And I can tell you, we wouldn't be talking about childcare at the same level we are as coming out of COVID.
Yep. I think you're supposed to ask me questions.
Me?
Yeah.
So okay, we just talked about the new justice bill, but when do you think we'll be back in Congress to talk about what's next for CARES, particularly for local governments and municipalities that have been left out. Some of our municipalities, like the city of Miami, have incurred a lot of expenses, and we're worried.
Exactly. I think that Congress is going to go back into session the last 2 weeks of July. Certainly, at least, not the last 2 weeks of July, the last week of June and the first week of July until the 2nd. I think we're going to be there for about 10 days. We'll pass the Justice Bill, and then hopefully we'll have negotiated something with the Senate so that we agree on the state and local part at a minimum. As everybody knows, state and local governments have lost a lot of money. Congress, bipartisan in the Senate, is prepared to give the state and local governments resources, but the president hasn't agreed to that yet, and the Republicans just don't move unless the president puts his thumb up, actually. So I think we're talking about 3 weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks from now.
And then I think one thing that's on everyone's mind here in Florida is how the federal government was so well intentioned in making sure that unemployed workers received an extra $600 a week. And then some states, especially Florida, have completely failed at getting that money to our workers who desperately need that. I know you invited Senator Rodriguez to speak today up at a congressional panel. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about why you wanted that to happen and what you think might be next if Congress decides that we need to extend unemployment.
Yeah, I got a call from Senator Wyden, who's the ranking member of Senate Finance, and he asked for a recommendation for someone to testify on the state of Florida's unemployment system, which is an old system, and it's designed to say no. I think is a fair way to put it. And so I recommended Senator Rodriguez because he's become a personal expert on it, as the commissioner and I know, because we all meet together. Everybody that represents, actually, that's inside of my district meet together. In the HEROES Act, we've extended unemployment until the end of January next year. In the HEROES Act, we've extended the small business loans. I do not believe that most of our restaurants are going to be able to open fully for a number of months, and I believe that we ought to be helping them make that transition, and other small businesses at the same time. So the HEROES Act, which has the state and local money in, which we passed in the House, has some of these things, plus another $1,200 to families where a couple is below 150,000 and individuals are below 75,000. Every bit of money we've put in helps our economy, but more importantly, helps people to stay afloat. And we've all been disappointed with unemployment compensation. We don't have an alternative. We actually do have an alternative, but I don't think we're going to exercise it. And we just have to keep the pressure on the state to get that money out. As I've said to everybody, all I'm doing is bringing your money back to town. You paid your taxes into Washington, and I'm bringing it back, including the billions that are involved in small business loans, grants, they're really grants, as well as the hundreds of millions that we've given to the state to take care of those who have applied for unemployment, plus all the COVID money that we have brought in at the same time.
And ladies, do you think there's a possibility that as part of our post-COVID recovery, there would be the grand bargain on infrastructure that we all desperately need to, again, get done the work of the people in our communities and, frankly, provide good paying jobs?
There are going to be hearings in the next 2 weeks on an infrastructure bill. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the commissioner, because she loves this stuff, it's on surface. It's a surface transportation bill, but we've been able to put some things in there first of all, it's a very green bill because so many of us went and testified and said, look, we need green materials. We need an emphasis on pedestrians and bicycles, as well as trying to do something about cars and about public transportation. And so it's a very green bill. And I expect with some changes that we will have bipartisan support on that bill. But it's not as big an infrastructure bill as we want, but at least it's a start. And we'd like to get some money here. All that other money that we've provided, it's not stimulus. It's really to try to make people whole. So this would be a genuine stimulus bill.
And we, just to reassure you, we have a few projects kind of ready to go, some of which are bike and green infrastructure related, so that we do not have the money locally yet to implement. And so if that comes down, we would be prepared with a number of items. And then we are, just in case we get a little bit bigger levels of money, we're accelerating some of the environmental studies and things on some of our smart corridors. So if there is an opportunity to get some federal funding for that, we'll be ready. But as the Congresswoman said, not expecting that big of a bill this year, unfortunately.
No, but we'll have money for research and for impact studies in it. And I'm trying to get permission to put in an amendment that will help us recycle things like train tracks and the kind of thing Underline is doing, so that we can bring some resources and just make our community more walkable.
You're here. We have another question from Jane Torres of Moms Demand Action. Is there any specific conversations about reallocating funding from police departments towards human services, education, mental health, because police officers fundamentally don't want to be social workers, teachers, or mental health experts?
I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we need to work on. I wish people wouldn't use the word defund or unfund, because I think all of us believe strongly that we have to make deeper investments. And it's what the commissioner was talking about initially, in mental health. There's no question about it. I often say, if you looked at the man who shot the students in Parkland, he had real mental health issues from the time he was a little kid. And there was no seamless system, even though his parents and his teachers and his social workers tried to get him to services. It just wasn't seamless. He kept falling between the cracks. And mental health services, nutrition services, I mean, a whole set of employment opportunities, improving our school systems, all of these have deep disparities that are as much part of this racism discussion as the criminal justice system that we're discussing. And whether we slow down the amount of money we give to the police or simply add resources so there's some balance here. Many departments are reimagining themselves in which they've got a triage system. If there is a mental health issue, it's not the police that have to deal with it, but there's a team of people that work with that individual or with that family. So there are ways of doing this, and we ought not to dismiss the discussions about who ought to be doing what and what's best for our community.
Commissioner, do you have any perspective on that from the county budget side?
Yeah, so I have been reflecting a lot on this, because I've also been reflecting on the sorts of commissioners and mayors that we tend to have, at least on the larger scaled communities here. It's always been comfortable for Republicans to say, I added money to the police department. But it's sometimes hard for them to say, I really care about the homeless and I want mental health count. I mean, it makes them sound soft, right? as the Congresswoman said, like we women and stuff, we don't feel so bad about feeling soft sometimes. And so what we have found is a lot of these social services are being provided by law enforcement, and perhaps they're best provided elsewhere. But what we don't want to do is defund those services and make them go away without a plan for them. And I can tell you by next Tuesday, anyone that's hoping, I'm not going to have a plan by next Tuesday, right? That is a long, thoughtful conversation about how do we do that. And I'll just leave you with the example. A lot of our mental health services are provided by the corrections department, right? Clearly, that's not where this should be happening, right? Because that means it's happening after the fact, not before the fact. But every person on this call knows when we try to fund mental health services, it's a struggle. But when we say we're funding law enforcement, it feels, I don't know, stronger. So we, the voters, like you all, the voters, me as a voter, we have to give people permission to talk about social services that help people before they ever are impacted by the criminal justice system and the police. But that is not a fast discussion. It is a slow, thoughtful, methodical discussion, because we may not like that some of these services are provided by the police, but they are being provided. And the police in many cases are doing an excellent job at providing those services. So we have to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
That's exactly right. And one of the things we have to be careful about is understanding what the police do now, because a lot of what they do is refer to agencies. It could be that we're better off having teams so it's seamless in terms of the handoff, because sometimes it's not easy to help someone find housing or to get mental health services because we haven't funded those agencies properly. But in my experience, no one is more supportive of funding mental health than police officers. They've seen enough of it. Yeah. And they want to help people, and they would be the first advocates for us making investments in the services that they're literally referring people to.
Absolutely. Ladies, we are right at the 3-minute mark. I'd like each of you to please give us your top 2 call to action, because you're both in an election year. Commissioner?
Okay, well, for me, get your vote by mail ballot, because I think it's safer if we all vote from home. So do that, please. The election will come to you. And the second thing I ask of you is, please, if you don't already know me, get to know me. Ask me things that matter to you, and I hope that you will decide that I will be a thoughtful leader for the next 4 years for District 5 in Miami-Dade County. And if that is the case, you can use that vote by mail ballot to vote for me.
Let me announce that I'm going to vote for Eileen Higgins. Let me say a couple of things. My district is District 27, and I, of course, want everybody to vote for by mail and to be safe. There's no question about that. But getting additional voters is going to be very important. I ran into a family the other day, and they said that they weren't citizens, but one member of the family was a citizen. And he was 20, he hadn't registered yet. And I said to him, you've got to vote for them. You've got to take the responsibility to vote for the other members of your family. And he promised me that he would do that. And he just emailed me and said that he had signed up to vote. So we shouldn't leave anyone out. And of course we want your votes, because we think we've done a good job, but we want more voters at the same time. And anything we can do to expand the group. When you vote, you feel like you're part of the community. When you vote, you're making an investment in your community. And just because someone in the family isn't documented doesn't mean that the other members of the family ought not to take responsibility to represent them. So thank you very much. Thanks to Ruth's list. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
thank both of you for your bold and courageous leadership. And I will make the ask of our 47 participants, if you haven't yet made a contribution to Eileen Higgins or to our Congresswoman Donna Shalala, please go to their websites and do so, because whether it's $5 or $50, every dollar counts towards getting the message out to our voters about the good work these ladies are doing for us in Miami-Dade and in Washington. Thanks everybody for joining us. Please save the date for our next Women Run Miami virtual edition. We'll be introducing candidate Maureen Porras for House District 105. It is a flip opportunity in the Florida State House. And the registration link is up on our Ruth's List Miami Facebook, as well as in our chat. And thanks again to our co-hosts, Mom Demand Action. Signing off, keep up the good work, ladies.
Thank you.
Hi, Gloria. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gloria. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.